welcome back to episode 2 of Wayne's Music, Music, Music. My guest today is Stephen Fearing, an acclaimed singer-songwriter with roots spanning Canada, Dublin, and the U.S. Known as one of Canada's finest songwriters, Stephen has released 13 solo albums and co-founded the celebrated roots rock band Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. With a career marked by collaborations with legendary artists and multiple Juno and Canadian Folk Music Awards, Stephen's music is a journey through storytelling, finely tuned lyrics, and masterful guitars. So join me as we dive into his life, influences, and latest projects. But before I start chatting with Stephen, I'd like to ask the viewers to please hit that like button on your computer screen and the subscribe button. That lets people know that people are watching the show, and it helps me to get interesting and new artists to interview for future podcasts. So, Stephen,
Yeah,
thanks for coming. I know you're a busy guy. It took us a little bit of time to figure out a date where we could do this.
my pleasure. I'm
Yeah.
really happy to be able to do something like this in such a great space in my hometown.
Yeah, the House of Al,
Yeah, tremendous.
creative co-op they call it, and it's just full of artists in every other
I
room.
didn't even know it existed, so
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, right downtown Victoria. Yeah. So you were born in Vancouver,
Yeah.
then you moved to Dublin at an early age.
Yeah.
Dublin has such a rich musical history. How did your time there shape your early musical influences?
Very unconsciously, but profoundly, I think.
Yeah, I would think.
When you're 6, 7, 8, 17 even. I mean, I left when I was 17. I finished my schooling. Nothing was conscious. It was all just sort of looking forward to the next day. But when you think about literary history, musical history, there's so many ways that this little country of Ireland has contributed to the world culture, and to be in the middle of it, and to be in the middle of Dublin in particular, it was profound. So my parents split up when I was 6, and my ma remarried, and so we moved to Ireland, which is where she's from. Um, and that was how we ended up there. But you always speculate, what if? If I'd stayed here, I don't know how different my life would have been. But being there, I was there when punk hit, when so many different things happened, and I was in this culture that was. Ireland is to England in some ways as Canada is to America, as sort of the smaller uh, of the two in that relationship.
Right.
But a very potent country to be in the middle of. And in hindsight, I realize I was there at a time of great change in that country's history. They were only 20 years out of becoming a republic. They actually became a republic, Ireland did, in the 50s, even though the War of Independence was over much earlier than that. But it was still very much a transformative time to be in Ireland, and the troubles up north and all of that stuff. So I think it was a really profound place to be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, were you a musician at that point, playing guitar, or?
Just barely. My stepfather, Al Moon, had a classical guitar hanging on the wall, and it was part instrument and part cool art object.
Sure.
And of course, I pulled it down and started trying to figure out how to play a couple of songs. Not because of the punk thing. I was actually interested in Gordon Lightfoot and Paul Simon and the singer-songwriter thing. And it wasn't very cool. I remember listening a lot to, my mother had a copy of Charlie Rich, Behind Closed Doors. Still one of my absolute all-time favorite records. But all my friends were listening to The Clash and the Sex Pistols,
Right.
and Charlie Rich was exceedingly uncool. But
Gordon Lightfoot would be cool too,
very uncool.
with that crowd.
Yeah, it was just sort of supposed to be the end of that era.
Yeah.
And that kind of, flared pants rock and all that stuff was over. But I could sort of see that the singer-songwriter thing especially was a way to pick up an instrument on my own and play. And so I started there.
Yeah, good.
I had some piano before that. There's a lot of music in my family, generations of it. But mostly in the classical realm or music hall.
Oh, okay. And now, weren't some of your schoolmates in Dublin future members of U2?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, they were all in my class. Well, Larry was in my year, and, Bono and The Edge, or Paul Hewson and Dave, they were Evans. They were a year ahead of me.
Oh, okay.
But I remember seeing the famous poster in the hall, "Start a band," that
Oh,
Larry Mullen put up.
oh, okay.
Um, God, if I could go back in time travel, I'd steal that poster. It was a handmade poster. It'd be worth a lot now.
Yeah, right.
But, yeah, they played our school disco a couple of times. They were called Feedback at
Oh,
first,
oh,
then they became The Hype,
oh,
and then they became U2. But same members of the band, they just sort of went through these iterations. So
yeah, right.
I watched them go from playing my school disco to playing a church hall gig. I remember seeing them in the Host Presbyterian Church Hall with the Virgin Prunes on the bill as well. And then I saw them in downtown Dublin in one of the nightclub bar, clubs, punk clubs, because they were kind of a punk band.
Yeah. Uh,
And then I left, and I moved to Minneapolis. I was supposed to go for the summer, but I ended up being there for 2 years, and right at the end of the stay, U2 Boy landed in the stores, and we went to see them at Fifth Avenue, and that was very exciting to see
yeah.
these guys that I'd seen in my church hall now in America. Yeah,
Playing huge
they'd made it across the
arenas.
water. Well, they were still playing small clubs.
Oh, okay.
It was sorta like, you hear stories of the Police touring Canada and playing the El Mocambo.
Yeah.
It was like that. It was their first tour, but they'd cross the Atlantic, which for an Irish band was
That's a big deal.
momentous. Yeah, there weren't many Irish bands. In fact, Thin Lizzy, that was about it.
Yeah,
That's about it. Phil Lynott was about the only Irish rock star
yeah.
that I can think of pre-U2.
That's pretty cool
Yeah,
to see their growth in
yeah,
the industry. So you moved from Vancouver to Dublin, then to the US, then back to Vancouver.
yeah.
What other parts of Canada have you lived in?
I lived in Ontario, in Guelph. I was just talking to Eric about that. I lived in Guelph, Ontario for 16 years,
Oh, okay.
and I lived in Halifax for about 8 years.
Oh,
I lived in Canmore briefly, off and on, worked in the Rockies. But, Vancouver and the West Coast, now that I'm back here, I'm realizing how much of an influence it's sort of it's the place in Canada I've spent the most time, and I was born here.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was doing my research on you, I was surprised to see you were born in Vancouver. I thought you were from back east.
Yeah.
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 So now that you're back, especially living here in Victoria, how do you like it? And uh,
I love it. I mean, it's
weather's better than
yeah, the weather suits my
least in a little bit.
clothes.
Yeah,
There's something about the Pacific West Coast of Canada, the smells, the sounds, ravens, all of it. It's so
yeah,
familiar to me.
yeah,
Living in Dublin, I've always lived by the ocean except for the 16 years I lived in Ontario, and, I really missed living by the ocean when I lived there, and when we moved to Halifax, it felt more familiar, but it was the wrong ocean. The Atlantic is really different than the Pacific, so being back in the Pacific, there's just something about the light and the way the air feels. It's very familiar. I like it a lot.
yeah. I know what you mean. In the mid '60s, our family moved to Calgary for
Oh, yeah.
2 years, and I had a lot of good times there, and saw some really good bands. But I I generally didn't like the weather because
Mhm.
it changed on a dime. One minute it's sunny, next minute it's hailing golf balls. But
Yeah.
now you've been praised as one of Canada's finest songwriters. Who were your early songwriting heroes, and how do you think they inspired your style in any way at all?
Yeah, I was just talking about this, with somebody. Lightfoot, my mother had Lightfoot's greatest hits,
Right.
and so you pull the guitar off the wall, and you gotta start playing something, and certainly Simon and Garfunkel, Paul Simon, he was really important to me.
Yeah. Great songwriter,
Yeah,
Paul Simon.
there's something about Lightfoot that I could connect with more. Not sure why that was, but probably I held on to being Canadian.
Yeah.
Being a Canadian in Ireland was kind of it was a bit exotic, but also there was a certain amount of homesickness for me. And so I gravitated to the Canadianness of it.
Yeah.
And when you are just learning to play and you absorb somebody else's hits, you're learning the chord patterns, but you're also learning the metaphors that they use, the way that they construct a line, the rhyming schemes, all of it, the narratives, the way they tell a story. And so all of that was really influential for me.
Yeah. Gordon Lightfoot is one of the masters of
Yeah,
songwriting for sure. Yeah.
he really is. He's a complicated figure, but I mean, his songs are so. One of my friends in Ireland used to tease me. He'd call me Foot Tappin' Steve because I loved the Lightfoot stuff,
Yeah, me too.
and it was very. It was sort of there's elements of country music in it, but it's not country. There's elements of folk music in it, but it's not folk music. It's sort of its own thing,
Yeah.
and without making too much of a leap, my sister brought Willie P. Bennett's album Hobo's Taunt back to Ireland. She came home. She had left ahead of me. I'm the youngest of three. So she had left ahead of me, and she came back, heard I was playing guitar, brought this album Hobo's Taunt, and it was a really pretty easy jump to go from Lightfoot to Willie P. Bennett. Similarly, hard to pin down what genre he was, but also very Canadian.
Right.
A little darker, a little less poppy.
Where was he from?
He was from Northern Ontario.
Oh, okay.
I'm not exactly sure
Yeah.
where in Northern Ontario, but he came to prominence through Toronto and the whole. Legendarily, Willie lived in Stan Rogers' closet under the stairs for a while. He was basically needed somewhere to crash.
Oh, really?
He lived at Stan's house in a closet.
You're kidding.
But yeah, he's Ontario guy,
Yeah.
and so without realizing it, I got turned on to Willie P. Bennett by my sister Jane, and he became very influential for me because again, I learned those songs.
Yeah, right.
And his stuff is harder to learn. It was strange song forms. They weren't as linear and obvious as Lightfoot's. And then the last person would be a guy named John Martin, who is a Scottish-English songwriter, a notorious alcoholic, tough man, but wrote some of those beautiful, achingly beautiful songs. One of his most well-known songs is May You Never, which Eric Clapton covered.
Oh, okay.
He had an album called Solid Air, which the title cut, Solid Air, was dedicated to Nick Drake, who was a close friend of his. And he is just tremendous, but his style of playing was very percussive with a backbeat. So he would play chords and then he would tap the body of the guitar with the heel of his hand or his fingertips.
Yeah.
And it gave this backbeat. And that was really important for me to
Right.
take the guitar beyond this sort of folky picking, Paul Simon picking style. Lightfoot was the strum,
Yeah.
but John Martin had this finger style that was tough, really percussive.
Now you do a lot of that, not a lot, I would say, but you incorporate a lot of that stuff yourself.
Yeah,
Finger,
John Martin.
finger picking and a little bit of percussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very much the John Martin thing, which is really important for me. As a solo player, you have to. Roy Forbes used to talk about the band in the box, which is suggesting a drum part, suggesting a bass part, trying to flesh it out so it's not just sort of strum all night long, which is pretty hard to hold a crowd on your own with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the idea, is kind of flesh out the arrangements.
You know, Elvis Presley, his first big hit, that kind of started his career. That's all right, Mama.
Yeah.
I was reading about that one day, and it said there's no drums on that song, and so I went, "There's drums in that. What are they talking
Yeah.
about?" So I went back and listened to it again really closely, and I realized there's no drums.
Yeah.
I always thought there was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
drummer there. Yeah.
The bass,
Yeah.
guys doing the slapping
Yeah,
bass.
yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Very, very powerful
Yeah.
stuff.
Now, how did the collaboration with Colin Linden and Tom Wilson come about, and what was it about working with them that inspired Blackie and the Rodeo Kings to keep going after all these years? Because now, didn't you tell me one time it was supposed to be
Yeah.
a one-time thing, and
One record.
it's been 20-something years.
27 years now, 28 years I think we're closing in on this year, but, it was, when I left Vancouver, and at this point, I'm in my 20s, 30s, and I'm moving to Ontario. I've remarried and, got signed to True North Records.
Right.
So I moved to Ontario and realized that I was gonna have to plug in quickly, to the music scene and find ways because I was sort of leaving the Vancouver folk scene where I had established myself to a degree and needed to plug in quick because Toronto's so much bigger
Yeah.
and, so much more sophisticated in so many ways, the whole Queen Street scene, and because I was on True North, I had the opportunity to open a bunch of shows for Bruce Cockburn. Actually went on tour with him on the Nothing But a Burning Light tour, and I was on his bus, and, Colin Linden was the band leader.
Right.
And Colin and I had crossed paths once or twice beforehand, and I was very aware of him, and I thought, "This guy's really important. I gotta figure out some project that will entice him. It's because I wanna work with him more." So we had written a song together, and, that was sort of the start of something, but I sent him an email because I knew that he had worked with Willie P. Bennett, and this was a time when people were doing the tribute records.
Okay.
So 12 artists recording 12 songs by
Yeah, right.
famous artists and put it together. And so I sent him an email saying, "What do you think of the idea of doing a tribute album to Willie P. Bennett? Because I know that you've got," and, he and his wife Janice had been having a conversation about the same thing earlier in the day, and he
Oh, wow.
opens his inbox, and there's the email. So
Wow. Good timing.
Colin being Colin, he ran with the idea and immediately suggested that we needed a third singer and that it would be way cooler to do it as a band rather than 12 individual artists.
Yeah,
But
right.
create a Willie P. Bennett tribute band.
And that's the first album?
And that was
Oh,
the start of it.
yeah,
And it was supposed to just be a tribute to Willie P. Bennett, but it immediately, at least to me, it was immediately obvious that there was something more going on than just a one-off.
Yeah.
Tom Wilson was really, Junk House, we didn't realize, but they were kind of about to start declining as a band, but they were
Okay.
still flying to Jamaica to make music videos, and, they were doing triple bills with Coldplay in Edinburgh. They were right in the middle of it all. And, so he was not interested in doing anything more, but within a year, Junk House has started to fall apart, maybe 2 years, and Blackie and the Rodeo Kings suddenly had this whoosh of energy behind it,
Yeah.
and, we started getting all these offers to work, so
Fantastic.
he just sort of transitioned from one to the other, and off we went.
Yeah,
It was
fantastic.
very unplanned, very spontaneous.
Yeah. So what's the secret to the band's longevity? You must all get along very well, or?
Well, we do, yeah. We used to say that we were the band that never said no, so if somebody had a good idea, we'd be in, but I would amend that and say that we're the band that says maybe.
Oh, is that right? Oh, yeah.
We get along so well. We do love each other, and there's a lot of laughing,
Yeah.
which is a big key part of it. Tom is one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life, and, I've watched him go from being, becoming sober. He quit drinking early on in the band's history, and I kinda wondered if that would be the end of the band because he's such an important part of it, but
Right.
he just transitioned right into, being sober without really seeming to change anything.
Oh, good.
But we get along, but, the key is that it's not the main project.
Yeah.
It's become a co-main project, I think, for all of us.
Right.
The last couple of years is hard to say, but we've been at it so long now, it's never gonna go away.
Right.
There was a point where we tried to make it the main thing in all of our lives, and it's just too difficult especially with Colin living in Nashville,
Right.
and me now on the West Coast, but at the time I was on the East Coast, and Tom in Hamilton. It's really difficult to make a band work like that.
It would be.
So having it as I wouldn't call it a side project, but an equal side, another side.
Put a tour together.
Yeah,
Once
put
in
an
a while.
album out,
Yeah.
tour it for, a month or 2 months, come back, do some summer festivals, and then everybody gradually dissipates into their own corners and
Well,
gets on with their own lives.
well, that could be part of the secret of the longevity
Yeah,
too.
very
It
much.
keeps the music fresh when you.
Well, then it means that when you're frustrated with your band because there's something you wanna do and you can't do it in the
Yeah.
band, it's okay. You just go do it in your own projects, and then you can come back to the band and step into your role with the band, and we do all have roles,
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
That's the way bands work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I saw you here in Victoria at the Royal. I think it was the 25th year anniversary or
Yeah, it
something,
was
but it was delayed
yeah,
because of
that's
COVID.
exactly
So
right, yeah.
so wasn't really the
I think it
25th.
was the 27th.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Well, it was still just the tail end. Well, COVID was still around because
Yeah,
my wife and I didn't go to concerts for probably 2 years. That concert was one of the first that we went to,
yeah,
and we were wearing masks,
yeah,
as most of the audience was still at that
yeah.
time, so but great show, 'cause the 3 of you did do you had your own personalities, and, it really was an interesting show.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a lovely thing, and there was a point where I don't know how I ended up in the middle
Yeah,
of these 2 really strong personalities because both of them are eccentric and real powerful people to be on stage with,
yeah.
and I don't think of myself in that way, and you never see yourself as everybody else does, but I went through a period where I wondered exactly how important my role in the band was,
Yeah.
and then over the years, we've had instances where 2 of us have worked together without the 3rd. So Colin and I have done shows together,
Oh, yeah.
and Tom and Colin have done shows together, and me and Tom, and it's not the same. It's
Right.
something entirely different without the 3 of us,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
so you realize, yeah, that's just it's kind of
I've got a role, yeah.
it just came together spontaneously, and it only exists with the 3 of us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I hope you keep doing it,
Me
that's for
too.
sure.
Me too.
Now, you also released 2 albums with Andy White, an Irish, artist.
Yeah,
One was called Fearing and White.
yeah.
How did that come about?
Oh, man, so I've known of Andy White for years. He's sort of a bit of a legendary character in some ways, coming out of Belfast. So he grew up in Belfast, I grew up in Dublin. He left Belfast because of the troubles, ended up living in Switzerland for a while, got
Oh,
married, and now he lives in Australia. And he, had an album out on True North.
okay.
And I remember Bernie saying, "I'm putting out this record by this guy named Andy White." I went, "Oh, I know him." And, this was many years ago now. I was still living in Guelph, and, I heard he was gonna be at the Winnipeg Folk Fest. So I made a conscious effort to go and say hello,
Right.
and, we just hit it off.
Yeah.
And Andy's always looking for a couch. 'Cause he's a quintessential troubadour.
Yeah.
So I said, "Well, next time you're through town, you come stay with me in Guelph."
Right.
And, he came through like a year later, and
Playing together,
we
for
started
sure.
playing together, but I said, why don't you let me put a band together, and when you come through, we'll be your band in
Oh,
Ontario."
oh, okay.
So we called ourselves the Tall Friends, and because we're all quite tall.
Yeah.
And, my motivation was I had just started picking up the electric guitar,
Oh, okay.
and it gave me the opportunity to play electric guitar in somebody else's band.
Yeah, right.
And then the next step was to write together, and I brought a bunch of those songs to the Rodeo Kings to record, and eventually we had enough. I said, "Let's make a record."
Yeah, right.
And we started working as a duo, and
Yeah.
it's just financially, it was too difficult with him living in Australia.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it sort of came and went. I still listen to those albums and think, "Too bad we couldn't keep it going because
Yeah.
he brought something out in me and vice versa. We indulged each other's love of the Beatles and
Well,
the poppiness of it."
I was just gonna bring that up actually, because the harmonies the first time I listened to that album, Fearing and White,
Yeah.
I instantly thought of, listening to your harmonies, I instantly thought of Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah.
Like, it just came to my head. The harmonies were just beautiful. So,
Yeah, well, thank you. I thought so too, and we both love the Beatles, and we went after that, and both of us are lyricists. I'm definitely, I think of Andy as being more poetic than
mm.
me. He's kind of a poet who plays guitar,
Oh, okay.
and, I'm more melodic. So we were able to sort of step into those roles where I would say, I got a melodic idea. I don't have any lyrics. And we would write to it. And I mean, it didn't always work that way. But the one thing was that we were both really competitive about who was going to sing the lead.
Yeah.
And neither of us was going to let the other person sing the whole song.
Oh, okay.
So it was like, okay, I'm not going to let you just sing the lead vocal and I'll sing harmony. We have to switch off.
Oh, yeah.
So we wrote songs that always had two parts that would
Okay.
interweave.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it meant that you can't really do the songs anymore without him. There's a couple I've covered, but yeah.
Yeah. Now, this next question, you may have already answered it. In your solo career, you've worked with artists like Bruce Cockburn and Sarah McLachlan. How does working with other musicians influence your solo projects? Because you already mentioned Bruce Cockburn.
Mm-hmm.
But one quick note on Bruce Cockburn. I saw him one time live, and Colin was playing guitar with him. It was a terrific show.
Yeah.
Colin's quite amazing on guitar.
Colin is an amazing sideman.
Yeah.
And there's a real skill to that job, and he's got it down.
Yeah, I saw them at, believe it or not, it was at Harpo's.
Oh, yeah? Wow.
Way back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
That was my favorite place to go. Yeah. But so I guess they influence you in different ways. And
Yeah. I mean, it's when I started doing this, I really thought it was important to be just the solo artist and carve out your own path.
Right.
I tried to not listen to other artists.
Oh, okay.
I kind of had this idea that somehow you had to create the whole thing and do it all on your own.
Yeah.
And then at some point I did this complete 180 and looked at it from the other side and realized that collaboration was hugely important.
Yeah.
And it was okay to pick up lyric ideas anywhere you could get them, melodic ideas anywhere. Use reference books, use rhyming dictionaries. Everything's fair game.
Yeah, right.
And as soon as I got there, the whole thing opened up for me. And Blackie and the Rodeo Kings was very much about that. Like, if this goes, then go with it. Sort of say, well, I can't do this because I'm a solo artist. So anything that I can glean from working with another artist or anything where I see what they're doing and get it, then at some point it's probably going to come out in my own music.
Yeah, right.
It's people have that habit of saying to you, people who aren't necessarily in the business, and they'll say, oh, this would make a good song.
Yeah, right.
And they've got some idea, and it's usually like, well, you should go write that song because it doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, right.
But a lot of stuff that you see, you hear, it goes in and then it comes out like a year later, 2 years later, and it might come out in a really almost unidentifiable way.
But it's been churning.
If it registers, and that's my job as a songwriter, is to be paying attention to all that little stuff.
That's
that
so true.
tiny little things that just make you go, huh.
Yeah.
As soon as you go, huh, you should pay.
You're onto something, yeah.
And it will come out sometime.
Now, your album, Every Soul's a Sailor, won the 2017 Worldwide Album of the Year on Blues and Roots Radio. And it includes one of my all-time favorite songs, by the way, Red Lights in the Rain.
Oh, nice.
Just love that song.
Right on.
To me, it's almost a perfectly crafted song. Just the melody, the words, just everything about it. I love that song.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. But what's the inspiration behind that album? Any special inspiration?
I've learned, I mean, there's always a story, but usually the story comes after. The inspiration is usually nothing more, it's as mundane as, I should make another record now because that's the way this business works.
Yeah.
And I like making records. I like the whole cycle.
Yeah.
So I've never really made a record where I went, I want to write a cycle of songs around
like
this
a
topic.
certain theme, yeah.
Yeah, it's more like after I'm done, I look at it and I go, oh, these are all connected.
Yeah, right.
By this.
Yeah,
but it usually takes a little while to see it. So Every Soul's a Sailor was just, at that point, I'd left True North. I'd put out one very, very obscure record on my own. Then I put out Between Hurricanes, which was a little bit more I was basically learning how to be my own record label,
Oh, okay.
which is a slow process. When you've worked with True North and they're distributed by Sony and you've got a publicist on staff and you just get to be the artist, it's very privileged.
Yeah.
Suddenly there's none of that infrastructure and you got to do it all yourself. And I'm still learning that lesson.
Yeah.
The last one I put out, The Unconquerable Past, before that landed in November of 2019 and then COVID hit. So that was the first record where I really had a chance to hire a publicist and start to do the whole thing the way it should be done.
Oh, yeah.
And this record that I'm about to release in March is picking up from where I left off with that one.
Right.
So it's a slow process of learning how to do it right and what is entailed. And there's always a sense of that the cycle is coming to an end and it's time to go back into creative mode, write some new songs, and kind of go through that process and then put them out.
And then the tour.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah. Now you produced a little bit too. You produced an album for Susie Vinnick,
Susie Vinnick, yeah.
a blues artist called Happy Here,
Yeah.
which was nominated for a Juno. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah. So as a music producer, what's the biggest challenge you face? And does it differ from performing and writing?
Well, just talking with Jordan here, I've definitely dabbled in producing my own stuff and other artists. I'm not an engineer, which sometimes there's such a big crossover between them, and more these days, a lot of producers are also really superb engineers. So I'm having to learn how to do more of that.
Right.
But for me, a good producer is somebody who I think of Rick Rubin as being an amazing producer, and he knows nothing about production.
He just kind of laid back.
Play an instrument. He knows nothing about any of that stuff.
He's
It's all about taste and what is going to make the best song happen.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, and I find this as a writer and as somebody who teaches songwriting from time to time, it's not about saying to an artist, "Oh, that's not good enough. Let's do it again,"
Right.
or "That lyric isn't good enough." It's actually the opposite. It's getting the artist to accept that it is good enough. In fact, it's really good.
Oh,
Because the artist's natural inclination, and I suffer from this, is to take a raw idea and be freaked out by the rawness of it, when in fact that's the very thing that people want to hear.
right.
And you polish it to the point where there's nothing left.
Yeah.
And so learning how to accept that, yeah, you may be a little pitchy, but actually there's something really special in the way you just sung it. That line might be a little rough, but you don't want to massage it too much because you'll lose the very cool thing that's in it. That's, I think, a producer's job is to support the artist and actually help them be as good as they already are.
Yeah. It's good to have a little edge on it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It really is. I mean, go listen to those Beatles tracks. I've worked with this producer friend, John Wynot, and every time we'd be in the studio and I'd start to get worried about something being out of tune, he'd say, "Oh, okay, we're going to have to do this again." And he'd put on one of the Beatles tracks and just turn off the left channel. Just listen to the right channel. And suddenly you're hearing McCartney singing out of tune a little bit. And the drum track is moving around and there's weird chords. And
right.
those are all mistakes that we don't hear anymore, but they're all there.
Yeah, right.
And they let them go because they were moving so quickly that it wasn't about getting perfection. It's just the spirit of it is so strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even I read this, so I don't know if it's true, but I heard that the Traveling Wilburys, they when they were recording, I think it was Tom Petty was kind of going, "Oh, that part's not quite right. Something's wrong." And it was George Harrison said that, "Don't worry, we'll bury it." And that's partly how they came to the Wilburys
Oh,
name.
that's great. I never heard that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. I mean, that was Colin's thing too. John Diamond, our bass player, said to me early on, he said, "Just get it right as quickly as you can, because I guarantee you that the take where you got it wrong will be the one that goes on the record. And if your part's not good enough, you just pull a fader down.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
There's no fixing it."
Yeah. So, you and one of my notes here was about songwriting workshops, but you kind of covered that already a
Yeah.
little bit there, so probably don't need to go too much into that. But you still doing those from time to
Yeah,
time?
it was something that when I did the crowdfunding for this new record, I offered, one-on-one songwriting sessions for an hour and a half,
Yeah.
and, they were really successful, and a number of people have been asking about it, and I have to decide whether I wanna keep it as something that I will do just for a crowdfunding situation because 'cause I'll be doing that again for sure.
Yeah.
That's the future of making records is, getting people to invest in it before you make it.
Right.
But I still do group songwriting sessions,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
and they're lots of fun, and, it's I I feel like one of the things I can do is try and get people to walk away feeling excited
Yeah. Right.
and enthusiastic about it because it's really easy to just come in and go, this line's not very good, and this is weak," and to pick all of I mean, it's endless,
Oh,
you can pick apart people's stuff forever. But to get them excited enough that they wanna go and do the work that it takes to get it up, a couple of notches, that's the thing.
that's a better outcome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, encouraging people is sometimes harder than pulling it apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, for someone who, like yourself, has earned numerous awards, including Junos, do those accolades change how you approach your music, or is that just a bonus getting the Junos?
It's a bonus. Honestly, for years, I would jokingly call myself the Susan Lucci of Canadian folk music. So she was a soap opera star that never, ever, ever, ever got the whatever the awards are.
Oh,
So I was always nominated, but I couldn't seem to get it. And then I finally got one, and then I got a second one, and now I haven't had one since. And
okay.
it really doesn't matter
Must make you
one
feel good,
bit.
though.
It makes you feel good, and it's a nice thing to put on the resume,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make one whit of difference to your career in any shape or form, not that I've noticed. It's all about how you connect with your audience personally and, whether people wanna spend $35 to see you play or not.
Yeah. Right.
And why the hell would they do that unless you really bring something to the table?
Sure.
So, whether you got a Juno or not means zip as
Yeah, they're
far as that's
probably not even really thinking about it, are they? They just want to.
they might when they're trying to convince their friends who have never heard you, "You should go, he's really good, he won a Juno."
Yeah. Yeah.
So it gives you this sort of credibility, but that's about as far as it goes. It's a nice piece of hardware to have on the mantelpiece.
Now, the life of a touring musician can be exhausting.
Yeah.
How do you stay grounded and maintain your energy after decades of touring? Because you're on the road quite a bit.
Yeah, sleeping is really important, and, just, like, all of the sort of, the crazy stuff that you do when you're younger, you can't do it. It's just not only can you not do it, but you don't want to. It's just too hard like, waking up in a hotel room with a hangover.
Yeah. And then
uh
getting on a bus or a
Yeah,
plane or whatever.
plane and dealing with this so much stress around lost luggage and getting stuck in traffic and all that stuff. So my whole thing is I try and build in days off. I try to get to the airport early. I try to get to the venue early. I'd rather get up in the morning and drive straight to the venue and get there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon than stay in bed for 2 hours and get there at 5, when you're supposed to be in sound check at 4. So it's really, really looking after yourself.
Yeah, right. That makes
Look
sense.
after yourself, eat well, sleep well, and, have a good time. You don't have to be a monk, but, you gotta just when everybody else is having the party, you gotta think, "And tomorrow I gotta get on the road and do this again, and then again, and again, and again." So, I will have a couple of beers and sit up and laugh because I love that. Then I go to bed.
Yeah. No, that's excellent advice to any of you musicians out
That's
there
right.
about to hit the road.
Sleep.
Well, we're almost finished, Stephen. And with so many years of success, what piece of advice would you give to young aspiring musicians trying to make it in the industry today?
Phew, well, honestly, I'll probably be taking more advice from them than the other way around because the business has changed so much,
Yeah.
and I think old dogs can learn new tricks, but they
Sure.
have to have somebody who can teach it to them.
Yeah. Mhm.
So learning I mean, here we are doing a podcast, learning about algorithms, learning about how to reach an audience that is now getting very used to listening to music for quote unquote free. Um, that's that's um that's a difficult thing to learn when you've come up in the business of record stores and radio stations and all
Yeah.
that. But I think there's no way to get around experience. And so,
Yeah.
if you are lucky enough to get a whole bunch of YouTube plays, well, that's great. But at some point, you're going to have to get out in front of an audience.
Yeah.
And that is a whole skill into itself.
For sure.
And there's no way around that except doing it
Yeah.
and doing it over and over and over again. And so I do run into a lot of young players and they're like, how do I get a manager? And how do I get a record label? And none of those things really matter until you're actually in a position where they want to come to you
Yeah.
because you're making money.
Yeah.
And if everybody's making money from you and they're making a percentage of what you make, then you have to make enough that their 10% is worth something.
Yeah. Right.
So don't waste your time going after that. Build an audience.
Yeah.
You can do it locally, and then you can do it provincially, and then you can do it nationally. But you can create it on your own
Yeah.
if you care enough about your music that you're willing to work at it very hard.
Yeah.
And as Wilson would say, nobody cares about your music as much as you do. They just don't. And if you don't care about it then that much, then you really should go and do something else.
Yeah. Right.
And if you can do anything else and it doesn't cause you to lie awake at night, then you should do something else. Because
Right.
um,
Not an easy.
trying to make a living at music
Yeah.
it can be soul destroying.
Yeah.
Because it matters so much. It has to matter so much that when you inevitably get rejected over and over and over again, it can really hurt you.
Sure.
And it can really make you feel like you're not worth anything. And somehow the love of the music has to be strong enough to get you over that.
Yeah.
And it has to be about the music, not about becoming famous or making money, which of course you have to be able to make money to live. So there's this weird conundrum, but
But it's
it has to be about the work.
Yeah.
It has to be about the
Absolutely.
playing and the music. And then if you can make a living at it, great. But you might not be able to make a living at it. It's very difficult.
It's
make
a
living at it.
difficult industry to
Yeah.
do, make a living at, but
There's this whole idea of when you're not a musician and when you're not an artist, that there's this sort of that people call it making it. And there's this very small percentage of people, even smaller margin now, who are making seriously big money.
yeah.
Most people who are making it are only making enough money that they can pay for their car and their mortgage and
Yeah.
maybe put the kid through school and afford to keep playing music. That's making
That's
it. If you can afford to keep playing, then you are making it.
Yeah, right.
But making money on top of all that?
There's only a
Good
few.
luck. Yeah, like, and the Taylor Swifts of this world, my hat is off to her.
No kidding.
What an amazing thing that woman has done, but it's very, very rare.
It is rare.
It's like almost impossible to do. So
Her career is amazing to watch. I mean, holy smokes.
yeah,
The tour she just finished, I think.
and it's all about her connecting with people.
Yeah.
She is a master of making people feel like she gives
Yeah.
a flying fuck about them. She really cares about them. They really somehow they get that through all that pyrotechnics and glamour and sequins. They think that she cares, and I believe that she does. So that's pretty amazing.
That is amazing, yeah. Now, finally, what's next for you? You have any new projects? You mentioned you're working on an album.
Yeah. So I've been working on this album since spring, January of 22. I got an email from a guy named Ken Coomer out of nowhere. I actually thought it was a scam because there was a bunch of scams going around aimed at musicians.
Oh, really?
And he basically said, "Hey, man, I heard one of your songs on Spotify. I'm a Nashville producer, drummer. I own a studio. If you ever want to think about doing something, let me know."
Oh.
So I looked him up. He used to be in Wilco for their first 5 records. He was in a band called Uncle Tupelo, which are kind of ground zero for some people in the Americana world. And after I'd ascertained that he was real, I sent him an email and said, I'm definitely interested, but I can't do anything for at least a year. I got to get my feet back under me, get going again. And so at the end of 22, we reconnected, and that's when I started creating the whole crowdfund and all that. So I've been working on this record since then, and it comes out in March, and it's called The Empathist. It's recorded in Nashville with a 4-piece band, including this amazing musician named Jim Hoke, who plays everything from pedal steel to piano to saxophones, harmonica, accordion, dobro. And he plays all of them really, really well. He plays pedal steel like 1970s Charlie Rich. He plays piano like the best Nashville piano player. He's astounding. He's a man in his 70s, a sweet, lovely human being. And he was in my band for 7 days.
Oh, wow.
So we got to make this really fun record. It's got 10 songs on it, and it comes out in March.
What studio were you in Nashville?
Cartoon Moon, which is Ken's studio.
Oh, okay.
So he does a lot of work as a drummer for other projects, and then he works as a producer and drummer for a lot of Americana bands. I was a bit of a wild card for him, but he heard my version of Lightfoot's Early Morning Rain, which was off the Between Hurricanes album.
Right.
And so I think for him it would have been a very different kind of a project.
Yeah.
He was interested in doing something that which wasn't sort of right down the road of Americana stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, it meant that I could get away from some of the more kind of typical folk production stuff. Going to Nashville, working with Ken, but working with Jim Hoke. Jim doesn't leave Nashville. So if you want to work with him, you got to go to Nashville. So I got him for a week.
Yeah.
And it was worth the whole thing just to work with him.
What a town, too.
Amazing.
I was down in May. My wife and I were down there for a week. It was a pretty amazing city. Talk about music.
I know. It's
everywhere.
It's amazing. You know, in East Nashville where Ken lives, you know, Lucinda's up the road. Dan Auerbach from the Blackies, he lives over here. Steve Dawson, who's a great Canadian songwriter, producer, he lives over here. Colin Linden's across the other side of town, and on and on.
Yep.
It's just maggoty with musicians and players and producers and engineers. It's mind-blowing.
And everybody's so good down there, too. Like, we saw...
Yeah, really good.
Along Broadway there, we were in different bars, checking out the bands, and every single band was outstanding.
Yeah.
It was like, what? How can there be so many people that are so good?
Yeah, and that's sort of the Broadway scene. Then there's the Americana scene. This is a little separate. And then the bluegrass scene.
Yeah.
And then the hardcore country scene. It's really amazing. I mean, the fact that Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys lives there. Lucinda lives there. Yeah, it's really an exciting place to be. And also, I couldn't live there. No, I could not live in Nashville, but sure love visiting.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same thing. I couldn't live there, but we loved it there.
Colin is right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
So he's, you know, when there's American Country Music Awards, he gets hired as the band leader. So he'll be backing up Reba McEntire. He's been on the Opry, in Opryland and at the Ryman, I think countless times at this point, as backing up different artists. Colin is right in the middle of it.
I could imagine.
Completely in awe of how
he's
so Colin, I got to tell you this because it's so exciting.
Sure.
He just co-produced, co-wrote, and plays all over T-Bone Burnett's new record, which has just been nominated for a Grammy. So he's on it as a player, as a co-writer, and as a co-production.
Wow.
With T-Bone Burnett, one of the greatest producers of our generation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, my hat's off to Colin Linden.
He's in a happy place down there.
In a happy place.
Well, thanks, Stephen, so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it and always enjoy your company.
Likewise. And thanks for steering me. Otherwise, I'd just talk about one thing for an hour.
So thank you, everyone who tuned in. And again, there's more episodes coming, so stay tuned.